you know, through other eyes. Yes. So we've been using different lenses to look at what goes on there. And we've been establishing more partnerships with state school teachers. So it's moving from a top-down view to a more parallel, let's say, view, a collaborative view, in which I think that we're actually sharing with teachers our concerns and working together. And this has changed and might very soon actually change quite drastically the way public schools are perceived, you know, in society for everyone. Yeah. I think I see a very strong light at the end of the tunnel there.
I think that partnership model is crucial, and I know, Valkyria, you've worked that way with public schools as well and got wonderful results. Yes.
I have a question. The point C, number 3, what is the relation between the regionalization and the transnational sphere in Brazilian higher education today? I have another question. Is there studies that prove what is the questions about adequation? The studies that prove what is the better literacy for that age, specific age or specific region? How is that research about it?
Okay, that is a question that is more a question I have for you, because I'm not a specialist in Brazil. But I am interested in the fact that you have the state educational system with state universities and state curricula, and then you have the national system of public universities with their own curricular guidelines that sometimes I understand conflict the state and the national. And then I am interested in sort of regional politics, because it does seem to me that you know, the Sao Paulo, Rio area in many ways is privileged in educational terms. You know, even though Freire worked in the Northeast, the Northeast still, I think, is seen as somewhat more disadvantaged, as I understand it. So I'm interested in that as a context in which you do your work here in Curitiba, or wherever you might move if you're a student here and plan to move to a job elsewhere. But then also how that fits within the global sphere. So I'm raising that question more to suggest that one of the other stories that globalization research tells is a story that the nation state becomes less important, or becomes important in different ways with globalization, and that other scales like the subnational and the supranational become more important, so that the region, the South American region, or the region of the Americas becomes more important with globalization. And you may have, the example for this in globalization studies is the European Union. That the European Union is a supra sort of national level where nation states give up part of their sovereignty in order to gain more power as an economic bloc on the global scene. And you have similar moves, you know, in South America with Mercosur and others. At the same time, though, you do have Brazil, a very powerful nation in the region, taking a kind of leadership role, not just in this hemisphere, but also in terms of the global South. So it's a very complex context in which you're working. So that's where my question came from. But I guess it was a question for you, not just you personally, but all of you. You know, how much of an impact you think this is having on what you do every day in the classroom and on the world your students will face when they graduate. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on. right now in California, you're seeing the collapse of the public education system. And you're seeing pressures on the state and the European Union. And it's not just a question of power within universities, but also within states. And in the United States, they're terrified. If you know the history of California, it was the great promise for public education following World War II. And they're referring to the prospect of the Brazilianification of the California education system. In other words, the introduction of private education. So this is where the tide is turning. There's some switching going.
Yeah. So, as you can tell, I've been doing a lot of work with political scientists. And I've been thinking a lot about that as one of the contexts that's creating pressures on what we do.
You know, the way I see it, consumerism has really affected the way we see education, and you can clearly see that. So whenever there's the new best thing, we want it and we want it now.
Right, right.
And one does not go from A to C without going through B first. So we need real goals, not you know, immediate goals, but short-term and then eventually long-term goals that can actually meet, so to speak.
That's right. Yeah, I think so. I think you always have to be thinking in terms of goals at all of those different levels.
And be critical. I mean, is this good for me? Just because, you know, such and such schools are talking about it, doesn't necessarily have to be the best for me, for my school, for my students.
That's right. And I think people are starting to feel that way about a lot of the new technologies. I think PowerPoint is still very useful and very valuable, but it can also sometimes stop discussion. You have to use it in a skilled way, as Valkyria did. But you have to, I think it's not that older ways of communicating are disappearing. It's just that we have more options for using them together with newer ways. But there's a danger if you're too rigid. A friend of mine was invited to present on his research at a conference where he was told you have to follow this particular program. It's something the scientists use. I can't remember what it's called. But you're only allowed 20 slides, and each slide must take exactly 60 seconds. And your research must be squished, you know, packaged into that format, and there's no alternatives. That, I think, is a danger.
So this is the reason why I just wanted to bring the issue of globalization into this debate, because understanding the idea of the presence of globalization in our society, in the teaching of foreign languages, you see, in how people interpret is crucial now. I think this is, you know, very important understanding, right? The hegemonic ideas that we find within globalization. Right? That's right.
Yeah, thank you. Nobody wants to ask about Globish?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you heard that term?
Yes.
You've studied it. Yeah. You know all about it.
No, I haven't studied it. I've just seen a site on the internet,
Oh, okay.
and then it's 1,500 words.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, it was sort of. The term was invented by a Frenchman who was very unhappy about the rise of global English and the danger it posed to French. And he called it decaffeinated English. And he felt, though, that if you had this debased vocabulary with only 1,500 words, very little grammar, if any, that would actually put English in its place and keep it. Tame it. That's right.
Yeah.
Tame it. And so he published 2 books, about Globish. But there have been other books published since, including by people who see it in a more positive light. Who say, for example, that it levels the playing field again, but in a more positive way, in that it takes away the privilege of the native-born English speaker. Because often, 2 people from other language groups, Japanese and Polish, can understand each other better in Globish then they can understand a native English speaker. So it makes that communication easier. So I was struck by what this member of the European Parliament said to me. I hadn't quite thought of it this way before when he said, that I said the European Union is wonderful because they translate from so many different languages. They spend a fortune on translation. And he said, no, it doesn't work. It's not just that it's expensive, but it doesn't work. We have to work in English. I accept we have to work in English, but it's only fair that native English speakers change how they speak when they work with us. They have to change their vocabulary. They have to change the speed at which they speak. They have to change in all kinds of ways to make themselves more immediately comprehensible to people for whom English is not a first language. And I think that makes sense, right? Again, it means that you're meeting on a more equal basis. It's a kind of partnership. It's not the assumption that you already know English. It's a recognition that all languages operate at a number of different registers. And that anyone speaking a language, and certainly anyone getting a degree in English, should be able to function at multiple registers rather than a single register when they're speaking or when they're writing. I think the problem with English literary education in North America has been that we trained people who were very good at reading novels or poetry, but they were useless when it came to reading government documents or reports or manifestos or all the other many registers in which English is used. So I think it applies to how you read writing as well as how you speak and how you communicate. So I think that the recognition that even in a single language there are multiple registers is very, very important. And very important for us when we're teaching, because we need to give our students all the flexibility that they will need, for working in all these different environments with these different scales and registers of English. Are we running out of time?
Well, if we still
questions for
we can either see if there are any more questions directly to Diana, but we can also open the debate and include whatever you want to ask, in fact, because we're very open here. So if you want to ask Katie any questions as well. But I just wanted to add something about this idea of English as an international language and Globis. Because I think that the assumption of this participant, for example, of the conference there, of the social forum, is the assumption that meanings are produced in linguistic forms only. So as long as you control the linguistic structure or limit vocabulary use to 1,500 words, then you can guarantee that communication is going to happen. And I think there is much more to communication. To me, for example, changing native speakers' attitude to communicating with non-native speakers is going to guarantee communication better than if you just change the language itself that they use, right? I think there's a lot of, people expect language to be transparent, and that's not only native speakers of any, native speakers, we're all native speakers of different languages.
That's
right.
right.
But we assume that language is transparent, so that we're just sharing a code.
Yes.
And that's a big problem, because in practice we know it's not transparent. But when we relate to others, we tend to have this expectation. It's a huge problem.
I think that's a really important unpacking of his statement. I think that is what he was trying to do. He was trying to say English speakers need to change their attitude. And he was just using the Globis as a way of trying to sort of throw the English speaker off kilter, making them feel less advantaged, putting them at a slight disadvantage. But also making them think about their assumptions. You're right, about how language operates, that it's not transparent.
So we're open to
I
any
think
other
that